I love that I can make this video. I like to imagine that only at this specific moment in history, with someone of my social type, could you make a video at the anthropology and philosophy of real-life NPCs. The digital world allows the blurring of lines between what's a shitpost and what's an actual statement. Hell, that's the entire internet historian's career. This is not a video about NPCs in video games, or how they were created. This is not a video game channel, and I don't particularly care if some Japanese studio in the 90s invented them or not. This is a video about the NPCs we see in our daily lives. We're getting ahead of ourselves here. For the older folks listening, what is an NPC? NPC stands for non-player character. In video games where the hero goes on all these crazy adventures around the world, often killing monsters, dealing with insane plots, and more, the player runs into these scripted characters named NPCs. An example would be that there's an NPC that runs a local bar, or a school teacher you need to question for your murder case. The joke with NPCs is that their limits are often very clearly seen by the game player. Since these characters aren't really expected to do that much, you'll often see them repeat the same lines over and over again, have a strained limited vocabulary, and they're often caught doing weird or bizarre repetitive tasks that don't make much sense. Seeing an NPC is like seeing a glitch in the Matrix, where the creators didn't put enough thought into these characters and predict how they would actually interact with the world. However, the next logical step from here was to compare these video game characters to people in the real world. For inhabitants of modern industrial societies, you run into lots of people who behave in scripted ways. When you deal with the barista at a coffee shop, bump into someone in the subway, or go to class, the interactions are in many ways scripted, since that's how social norms work. The NPC meme is now one of the most famous, and calling someone an NPC has become ubiquitous among people in my age group. Partially by challenge, I'm going to make an argument here that nested inside the NPC is actually a profound symbolism about the failing of modern society. You may chuckle, but wait till the end of the video and you'll see. Let's get started. To start, I'm not a gamer. My dad had a rule growing up that I could only play strategy games until I was age 16, and after that I was too busy to get super involved. I've sunk more hours than I can count into Total War, Company of Heroes, or StarCraft, but I never really got into the kind of games that use NPCs. I've played a decent amount of Skyrim and Kingdom Come Deliverance. To be clear, I am colonizing the gamer space as a history buff, but I feel absolutely no remorse at that. I'm also not a memeologist. To be fair, that's not a real thing, and anyone over the age of 15 who claims to be that is a disappointment to their entire ancestral lineage and nation. In this video, we're not going into NPCs as an actual video game phenomena, but rather why the NPC meme strikes such a chord with people, and why it's so symbolically important. The reason I made this video is that the NPC meme had a deeper resonance than I expected. I've explained NPCs to baby boomers and older folks, and they almost always start using it in their daily conversation. Once someone sees the NPC theory, they suddenly start seeing it all around them in the outside world. This is an idea Goethe invented named physiognomy, which has a couple different ways it manifests, but which means that by studying the outward forms of something, either how it looks or the art it makes, you can determine what its inner soul is. Spengler and Jung have pushed this idea even further with the arguments that you can determine a society's soul and philosophy by looking at its art, or by looking at its mythical story structures and dreams. We can unpack the underlying logic of human psychology. Something like NPCs are objectively silly, but it also speaks to something deeper in human society. Most young people in the modern world feel invisible. If you're most young people, you go to work at a soulless corporation, come home, scroll through Instagram, watch Korn, and restart. I think people resonate with the NPC meme since they feel like NPCs. They look at their lives and wonder, if I were to be an NPC, how would my life be any different from what it is now? There's a certain degree of hollowness and artificiality to modern life. People feel like they could be living in a video game. On an anthropological basis, anonymity has its advantages. To use the video game metaphor, the main character, who's off fighting monsters, is much, much more likely to die than the NPC who stays in the town selling beer. The thing is that tradition and culture, or how a society functions, is an evolutionary adaptation that's been tested for thousands or millions of years to work. In most cases, that collective wisdom is smarter than an individual. Breaking against tradition and convention only works if you're intelligent and hardworking enough to make something better than the society's shared brain. This means that for most people, listening to their social superiors and social convention is the smartest strategy for them. In fact, the vast majority of the population, or around 3/4, are low in trait openness, which means they actively do not like thinking about abstract ideas, and it's difficult and makes them uncomfortable. For most people who grew up in small towns, a normal experience is bringing up some crazy imaginative idea in school and having people shrug at you and tell you you're weird. This is understandable from an evolutionary perspective, since only a very small minority of the population is creative enough to think about abstracts in a useful way. Most people who try to be artists, intellectuals, and more are just bad at it. There is this whole subculture of people who are trying to be original, but through that, they are part of the generic group of people who are trying to be original. Lots of people want to be special, but through wanting to be special, they become basic. Find a punk rocker who dresses like a 17th century nobleman and sings about coltan mining in the Congo, and I'll say he's original. Maybe not good, but still original. In fact, societies need to mostly be NPCs for their own survival. For an example of a country with too many main characters, look at Ireland. Ireland was an anarchic warrior society in which every individual believed himself worthy of being king. In other words, a society where everyone acted like a main character in a role-playing video game. The result of this was the Irish were incapable of unifying and were conquered by the English, who killed off their ruling class and kept the Irish as second-class citizens in their own country, incapable of owning property, voting, or obtaining an education. Ireland has been consistently, until very recently, the poorest and least advanced country in Western Europe. Boring monotony is the normal state of the human condition. Most people for all of history have lived tedious and boring lives as peasants. If you were to go back to 1500 and explain the idea of NPCs to a nobleman, he would completely understand and would say, "Oh, you mean the common people." In this manner, the NPC culture carries an elitist and classist undercurrent to it, that there is a small group of people who imagine themselves to be in a separate range of existence from the majority population. Think of your average historic peasant, whether in medieval Europe, ancient China, Aztec Mexico, or modern India, living the same kind of life as their fathers and grandfathers, staying in the same village, and other very boring, seemingly programmed things. For reasons we'll explain through this video, the people at the time didn't view the lower classes as NPCs, rather more like animals or children, since their worldview is not as mechanistic and artificial as ours is today. For a 17th century farmer, the world seemed very real to you, since the key distinction that allows the idea of a modern NPC to be independent from the peasants of previous societies is the artificiality of the modern world. Something I think a lot of people pick up on an intuitive basis. Those peasants didn't feel like they were video game characters, since they were deeply grounded into their place and time. If you were a pre-modern peasant, although your life was boring, you belonged to a tight-knit, shared village society with people you knew for your whole life. You probably had a very close family, children, friend group, a religion that explained the world to you, and an environment you lived in which felt real since you didn't know anything else. I'm not trying to glorify what was in most cases an incredibly hard life, but there are reasons that it lasted for thousands of years, and our society is falling apart at the seams only decades after it was founded. For a 17th century farmer, the world seemed very real to you since you had lots of relationships that you could place yourself in. Instead of feeling anonymous, your life probably felt too public and too personal. People would remember the dumb mistake you made as a teenager for your whole life. Your lord who determined all your governance either liked you or hated you. And your kids, friends, and parents probably saw you have sex. The culture you lived in was the collective experience of people like you or your village, and was thus intensely personal, but also had useful advice for the situations you'd face on a daily basis. We like to discount variables like religion, family, community, and so forth in the modern world, while the pre-modern viewed them as very important. However, we've consistently found with studies that they are the thing that makes people the happiest, much more so than money. Thus, when you look at their collapse, we can't view it as a secondary problem, rather the number one issue for society. We treat the breakdown of community and family as a bad side effect of having a better economy, while the reality is you're actively dismantling your entire society's ability to function. However, for people today, they feel like they're not living in a world that exists for them. Industrial civilization is based fundamentally off treating human culture as a commodity and constantly changing with no stability, while also valuing the physical world over the emotional and social. Today, the lodestone for people is they want to be rich and have lots of sex, and that's supposed to make them happy. There's not really a concept in our culture that you can be rich and surrounded by beautiful women, but you still feel sad, spiritually empty, lonely, and alienated. These are treated as side dishes, while the reality is that they're the main course. A complaint I hear in our society's subconscious, especially among Gen Z, is this all there is? Do I just go to work and watch TV and go on a couple dates, and does life have any meaning except this bizarre postmodern myriad of confusion and searching after material hedonic pleasure? And am I here for a reason? And this is the question that gnaws at our society, eating it alive. Due to everything becoming a commodity to be traded, in modern society that means nothing is stable and can be taken for granted. If you choose to stay in the same hometown for your whole life, your friends won't. The beautiful forests you played in as a kid will be steamrolled for shopping malls. You can get the love of your life, but she'll probably leave you. You probably don't know or care about your boss, and vice versa. You won't work the same job for your whole life. The logic of industrial civilization is that everything is a commodity being passed through a factory, and that includes you. Once everything that tethers you to the ground and reality is infinitely changeable, you are filled with staggering loneliness and listlessness. Every layer of modern society treats you like a cog. You go to a bureaucratic school, you work in a giant company, you date through an app, you die in a retirement home. These organizations view and treat you like a cog because you are, and so in fact, you are an NPC. Implicit in this belief is that the differences in how people really are bad. If a company based out of New York chooses to build its factory in Bangladesh, shutting down one in Pennsylvania, it doesn't care at all at the people or circumstances being affected by this change, rather just the bottom line. If you move your company's headquarters to Georgia from Michigan, you won't learn or care at the local culture and history in Georgia. You'll just assume all Americans are the same because you're rewarded through that belief. When you go to school, they design the curricula around an average person, which is a fantasy aggregation of a bunch of traits that the leaders want to look for. If you deviate in any way from this fantasy average, if even by being more curious, creative, or positive things, you will be punished by the system since you make their life more difficult. The biggest trend in business management over the last 100 years is to treat workers literally as if they are robots with no agency. There's also this trend of corporate takeovers where one business exists to buy out another business, cuts most employees so that the company dies, and then the money is pocketed by the new CEO and shareholders when the company dies. Modern management gives the individual worker no agency, micromanaging every aspect of their work, killing any human soul or creativity. The thing is that this is not effective in the long term since an unmotivated workforce needs more managers to control it, and it kills the company's spirit. However, people don't care about the long term. The reason previous generations tolerated this soullessness is because it hadn't fully worked through its logic, but also modernity gave them godlike economic and technological advantages. And the thing is, I'm not going to openly shit on modernity here because every era has its strengths and weaknesses, and I'm glad that I don't have to worry about dying of dengue fever, or I can fly to Europe in 6 hours. However, every era must end, and towards each era's ends, its flaws are far too big, and they start rupturing the society apart, and we will soon see that with modernity. Modernity is built off taking social trust from previous eras, created by religions, families, communities, and more, and then monetizing it for the benefit of the elite, and then worsening the collective functioning of the society. We know this to be true since the societies that have had the most social engineering and experience with modern industrial civilization also have had serious social problems that have killed their ability to function. This includes the former Soviet bloc, Western Europe, and blue states in America, while jobs and factories moved to regions that have seen less of modernity's erosion of values. Thus, they are opened up for the monetization of their collective culture for the benefit of the elite. The endpoint of modernity and progress, which its political exponents actively agree upon, is the liquidation of the family, nation, religion, and community in exchange for more material gain, which, in fact, largely accrues to the upper class. For the lower classes, they use those to balance their hard lives. Among the lower classes, the collapse of all those things has caused mass drug usage, breakdown in family, and mental health problems, which are now at the worst levels in history. I can hear people in the comments saying the system I'm describing is capitalism, and that I'm missing the real demon who's pushing this, but that's objectively not true. Every industrial society, whether or not it was capitalist, including the Soviet Union or Maoist China, or even third world societies like Argentina, have these very same problems. And if you go back to pre-industrial capitalist societies like America in the 16 and 1700s, these weren't problems. The left uses capitalism as a bogeyman, whether or not it makes sense. I've been thinking a lot about Spengler and the Bible lately, and there really is nothing new under the sun. And Spengler said that societies often go through the phases that I'm describing now, with a breakdown in traditional society, as well as depersonalization and exploitation by large bureaucratic structures. And you see this in the Bible, where the Old Testament prophets talk about very similar problems as what I'm describing here. Alternately, Israel at the time of Jesus also had very similar issues of decline in traditional culture and slavery. And slavery did a lot of the things I'm describing here with bureaucratic depersonalization. And one of the points Amaury de Riencourt made that's very interesting is he said, if you were to explain wage work to someone from the ancient world, they would say, you mean slavery, and they wouldn't be able to see what the distinction was. And that doesn't mean that there isn't a distinction, but both of these are systems that submit a person's life to a depersonalized system that controls every aspect of how they work, while for most of the rest of history, people were poor, but they were individual proprietors who had agency over their lives. And what we found from psychological surveys is that individual agency is much more important to people's happiness than actual financial wealth, barring if you're not in complete poverty. Modernity promises material wealth in exchange for losing freedom. This occurs most obviously in totalitarian societies, such as the Nazis or communists, in which, in exchange for surrendering autonomy, the experts promise to provide a material utopia. It's less overt in supposedly free democracies, but management still goes into every aspect of life. Today, if you throw a house party, the neighbors can call the cops on you. You can't get into bar fights. If you want to put a fly window on your back porch, you have to talk to the local zoning board. In some places, you have to have your interior decoration of your house, which you bought, approved by the local zoning board. If you're a parent and let your 12-year-old kid bike around town, you'll have the cops called on you, and I could go on. The irony is that most other people in history, even in autocratic states, lived lives that are much freer than ours today. The state was only a force that waged war and arbitrated legal disputes between people. Your daily life was subject to the local social norms, not an impersonal state. One of the most frustrating things about our times is that they are very tyrannical, but not in a traditional way. As said before, modern societies are often incredibly dismissive of individual agency and freedom, but it's always an impersonal bureaucracy that has no self-correcting features. Everything it does is in your interest, and so if you get angry at it, you're really just being oppressive and repressed, and you don't support the people who are helping you. Our society demonizes traditional power structures like the 19th century's business moguls or medieval feudal lords, but the thing with those is they were bound by custom, responsibility, and people knew who was in charge. Although both of those systems could be very oppressive, a feudal lord grew up in the same place as his peasants, and the culture gave him certain obligations. If things went wrong, there was also someone that the people could complain to. The bureaucracy exists to abdicate responsibility and has no boundaries, so it eventually concept creeped into a desire to control everything. Its tyranny stems from saying and believing that it means well. You can say that the previous systems were horrible as much as you want, and I'm not here to say how amazing life was in the past. But the reality is that historic systems like feudalism lasted stably for hundreds or thousands of years, while our current bureaucratic factory system is falling apart only decades after its formation. Over the 20th century, and until recently, people supported this system since it gave them an incredible material wealth. However, for young people today, most of whom are poor, lonely, alienated, and sexually frustrated, they look at it and they think, why did we sacrifice our freedom and all of our cultural values for wealth that we didn't get? It's the devil's bargain that always happens when leaders promise utopia. Communists, for example, always promise utopia and end up delivering slavery and starvation. Something I find deeply ironic is that modern industrial civilization and the mainstream have no defenders. Every part of the political spectrum says they hate the mainstream culture. The right blames the government and the left blames corporations. It's funny how the wealthiest, safest, and most advanced society in history is so loathed by its inhabitants. The reason that there are memes today of people pretending to be NPCs, repeating catchphrases, is that most people are. Most people have no independent culture, social connections, grounding in the world, and they work at companies that tell them exactly how to behave. We repeat back the lines we're sold by movies, the media, political pundits, and more. You're told what to think and believe it since it makes money for the elites. I grew up in Rust Belt, Pennsylvania, and it was interesting that there were rotting factories everywhere, and the city had very clearly gone into decline, but I had talked to other people in my high school, and they never even thought about it. And I would think to myself, guys, how is it that your entire state can decline so massively and none of you even care? And it's because the media didn't tell them to care because the media is too focused upon national issues. But once you abdicate responsibility over your local situation, you're going to lose everything. I find modern fashion to be completely disgusting. It combines consumerism, materialism, and lack of good taste. The fashionable thing to do today is spend $300 on a crappy hoodie that has an expensive brand name on it. This conveys a culture which puts no value on beauty, quality, taste, or the truth, rather solely upon popularity and expense. Someone in a company put no effort into that hoodie, did it for a quick buck, and you bought it solely because there's an expectation that it's expensive, which conveys wealth, which is the only quality that you care about. The other implicit truth in streetwear is that you wear the clothing of lower-class gangsters, since you cannot pretend to be higher status, class, or respect, which would make your compatriots feel judged for themselves not striving for those. This has not always been our culture. Culture used to be a combined cultural accumulation of things that should help you, even if they often did fall short. Your culture's stories, traditions, and history existed to give you solidarity and guidance on how to live your life. However, in modernity, the stories, art, and culture all exist to make a small elite wealthier, while giving the public bread and circuses to entertain them that doesn't challenge them. In our society, if you attempt to do anything except be a cog who consumes, you're mocked and shamed. If you try to make something beautiful, be honorable, be sincere, improve yourself as a man, or treat yourself with dignity and respect, fall in love and get married and start a family, support your society, be happy, take pride in your heritage as a white person, you are mocked for being cringe and old-fashioned at best, or told that you are a horrible person at worst. Modern society literally just wants you to consume and shut up, being the perfect cog. It offers a safety valve for the left for dissent, but the left never questions these main assumptions of the society, so they're safe. The left will always push for the establishment, bureaucracy, and management to have more power. I'm not trying to push a conspiracy theory here. Conspiracy theories involve having a small hidden cabal of people who are able to somehow micromanage the entire society. And that is impossible, because if you look over the course of history, the powerful have been pretty bad at running things and have consistently not succeeded at pushing their agendas. But what I am saying is that in a society like ancient Babylon, where the priests had a lot of power, you find that over centuries, that if you have any problem in your life, your society demands you speak to a priest. And over time, even if that wasn't the intention, incentive structures naturally end up where they're meant to. And so no one in power wanted a coalition between leftist radicals and corporations, but it happened because both have a shared self-interest in the growth of the bureaucracy. Plato invented the idea of the simulacrum, or a purposeful distortion of reality that is confused for reality. Marxist thinker Baudrillard brought this out in the 60s to say that this was an implicit problem in modern society, where the elites created a warped vision of the world. I think he's largely correct, and this is the second biggest reason behind NPCism. The communists blaming others for making simulacrum is a pot calling the kettle black, since the communists, alongside other Gnostic-descended philosophies like Nazism, their whole game is creating a vision of history which serves them, and then saying their theory is indistinguishable from reality, thus calling anyone who disagrees with their theory unscientific. It fits into the Marxist tradition of projecting their own failures onto their enemies. However, modern society has multiple simulacra, pushed by different sides trying to sell a narrative. As my co-host Dave Hamilton says, we live in a reality war today in which different sides disagree on the most basic factors of reality in the human existence. Adam Curtis, who I believe to be the best documentary filmmaker of our time, and amazingly all his stuff is free online, talks about this topic in amazing depth through multiple documentaries. He blames advertising, which shifted around World War I from selling a product to a vision of the world. If you buy Gillette razors, you're not buying razors, you're buying attractiveness, suaveness, and happiness. Politicians and other powerful groups hired these advertisers and then spread this logic across our entire society. We live in an age without any real external threats. Due to this, and with the culture of advertising, interest groups sold the public what they wanted to believe without a recourse to reality. Our culture is completely unable to distinguish what we want to believe from what's actually true. If we want to believe women are exactly the same as men, all the races are indistinguishable, and if we want to break down all of our social institutions, we can believe that we won't face any ramifications, and that's just going to be true. If anyone questions these fantasies, the society will cancel them and destroy their careers. Most people in modernity believe that if they want something to be true, it just is. This comes through multiple forms. I mentioned before the leftist iteration, but there's also technologism, which believes if we want to make a perfect technology without social ramifications, it will create a utopia, and the only thing preventing complete utopia is our lack of creativity and initiative. There's a free market version which also believes that if we just empower the market and let people do what they want, it will create a utopia with no ramifications. It really pisses me off that people state opinions that no one in the sciences believes. No one in any field of genetics or anthropology believes that men and women are biologically the same, that biological race doesn't exist, and no honest economist thinks that if you print infinite amounts of money, there's not going to be negative recourses for the economy, but we just push these opinions, and then there's no one looking to see if they're actually true. The reality is that our thoughts can't change the world. If your town's being destroyed by Mongols, you can't wish them to go away. If you're a peasant in Uganda, you're not going to become a venture capital mogul. This has always been obvious to me. However, I'm always shocked that most people don't believe in it. Like, I literally tell people that objective reality exists, and they'll say, but we can change it if we want to. I'll pull up historical examples of that not working, and they'll just say, but it's different this time. I'll reply, we've said that 1,000 times before, and it's always wrong, and then they'll say, but we have iPhones today. I literally cannot understand how the population can be this stupid. Only an era as safe and wealthy as ours can think that we control reality. People often say, we all have our own truths, which is insane, given it denies that the world is real, but also prevents any group cooperation or holding people to standards. You can't run a society if everyone has their own truth, given you can't hold anyone to standards, have people work together, or have any social trust. It destroys any sense of competency. You can have studied a topic for years and know the facts, but someone can just show up, know nothing on the topic, feel a certain way, and there is no recourse to that since there's no arbitration method to see if something is objectively wrong. This leads back to the NPC topic in a couple ways, since the removal of truth means that people self-isolate into groups of like-minded people. These become echo chambers as there is literally no way to form compromise between groups. Once you remove the truth and belief in reality, groups very quickly spiral into insanity and a complete lack of self-awareness. There's an interesting book named The Master and His Emissary by McGhilChrist, and it talks about the left and the right brain. The left brain views everything in mechanical binary terms, while also viewing everything through money and power. The right brain is capable of seeing nuance, the truth, beauty, meaning, and everything that can't be autistically, mechanically measured. And what happens is that the left brain is only capable of seeing half of the truth, but it believes itself to be completely correct, while the right brain has more humility, but consistently gets the correct answer when tested. Most modern ideologies are very left-brain focused in that they believe that they have complete understanding of the truth. That truth is solely based upon money and power and measurable things, and they lack any sense of beauty or meaning. And what ends up happening when you over-rely upon the left brain is that you consistently get the answer wrong because you can't hold yourself to any standard or see where you go wrong. You think because you made a logical argument for something that that is the only logical argument and correct. When you get stuck in mental loops like that, it decays the rest of your mental functioning, which is why religious fundamentalists or political radicals often can't make artistically beautiful things, have good humor, see beauty, be able to criticize themselves, and more. The NPC meme leans right, with right-wingers often saying left-wingers, quote, support the current thing. This is since the left literally has no grounding in reality. Frankfurt School thought, which the modern left literally and unironically is based off, says reality doesn't exist and the powerful make reality. This means that the left is not accountable to anything in the real world, thus it's only accountable to its popularity inside the organization. This has created comical results, such as when the Trump administration was working on the COVID vaccine, the left said they'd never use it. When that very same vaccine showed up, when the left was in power, they made mandates forcing people to take it. For the Mueller investigation against Trump, the left's view on Mueller fluctuated around 4 different times, between loving and hating him, depending on how it related to their self-interest. There are drag queen story hours, 8-year-olds who can't get tattoos or use sharp knives, can say they're trans and have life-altering surgical changes upon them, and much, much more, because it's not about making sense at this point. The converse of the NPC I support the current thing meme is the rights against the current thing meme, and Ken Wilber has a very good book about how both sides of our political spectrum have abandoned the truth. And the left would criticize the right a lot for Trump just making stuff up on the fly, and no one on the right would call him for it. And that's a fair criticism, and much of the right has been taken over by bizarre conspiracy theories, such as the election being falsified that I haven't really seen any evidence for, or saying January 6th never happened, or the left is QAnon baby eaters. Modern politics have become completely schizophrenic. The other side has to support the opposite opinion from the other side, whether or not it makes sense. The right has become anti the Ukraine war, which is a normal society all Americans would support since it's a war against one of our great rivals, since it's the opposite of the left. Remember when the right used to be the party of America's self-interest and supporting America's allies? The right used to support the vaccine, but once it became the left's thing, it suddenly became dogma. The right still believes in the truth to a greater degree than the left, I believe. So I haven't seen the same degree of schizophrenia, especially on the center right, which hasn't spiraled off like further right, but the right still designs its agenda against the left rather than logically. Every issue has to be politicized, even things like COVID that you would hope to believe would have brought us together. The destruction of truth means that society pushes what it wants to be true, which means as people experience the world and realize what they were taught as children were lies, it means people lose faith in the system. Young men like myself were taught growing up that men and women were exactly the same, and that if you date a girl, take everything she says at face value, treat her like a man, and flirt by just being nice. However, when you try that, and it fails, you look for something else. This is why Matrix metaphors are so popular in our culture. The Matrix is a false AI universe that people believe is real, while the reality is machines are harvesting their life force. This is a pretty apt symbol for industrial civilization. We are fed lies, like that we would get permanent economic growth, no war, that toughness and masculinity are now useless, that the sexes are the same, and that the world is whatever we want it to be. That system is breaking down now. The machine that is industrial civilization fed us these lies to keep us docile, as they gradually destroyed our societies and exploited our labor. It told us everything was good and shamed those who disagreed, so we couldn't resist as a culture. This is why the red pill, or the pill that you take to see that the Matrix is a lie, is the symbol that the new right uses. People in my age group grew up in a world that told them it was a utopia, but as they grew up, they very quickly realized it was a nightmare. The elite was so unrealistic that people are going to overreact in a brutal way at feeling like they've been conned and lied to for their whole lives. One of the things that pisses me off, and my friends make fun of me for talking about this so much, is that growing up, and I'm 22, is that the pop culture in schools and all of the adults in our society told us, you can follow your dreams and get whatever you want in life as long as you push hard. That just hang in there, and if you believe in yourself and listen to your heart, everything's gonna work out. And now, as I'm an adult, I see society falling apart, and I'm thinking, giving us that advice with the life that we were going to live is basically just telling us to fuck off. I keep on repeating this because people don't seem to have it sink in, but no part of the political spectrum in the sciences believes that different races, social classes, or sexes are the same genetically, and everyone agrees that genetics drives around half of personality, intelligence, and more. Our society pushes a position that's been scientifically dead for over a decade, and over time will become completely undefendable. However, when, for example, your society tells you that there are no important cultural genetic differences between races, and if you say that, will destroy you and your career, and then the science objectively returns that that's incorrect, it sets the society up for a horrifying reaction to say race, genetics, and more are the only things that matter, since the old society created no spaces to discuss them fairly, thus conceding the space to radicals. In summary, the reason people feel like NPC cogs in a video game is that they are. You are a cog in a machine that exists for the benefit of the machine that is industrial civilization. The machine lies to you, uses physical comforts to keep you docile, as it tries to gain complete control over your life. You are unmoored from reality or anything your ancestors used to make their lives felt real. Does it ever give people thought that the largest corporations and governments are allied with radical leftists that hate society? The reason that the ruling class is allied with those who want to destroy it is that both benefit from giving the machine power over human life. Some of you might have realized that I've drawn inspiration in this video from the Unabomber's Manifesto. That's because I have. However, this brings me back to the final point. I agree with the Unabomber's Manifesto's assessments of problems for modern civilization, much like Karl Marx, who correctly assessed that the capitalism of his era was oppressive. However, both err by thinking a revolution will fix everything. If we wanted to destroy the industrial world now, it wouldn't work. The military advantages conferred by industrialization mean it can't end. It's really easy to burn a building down and very difficult to build it. Revolutionaries always think that by destroying the old system, a utopia will just magically emerge from the wreckage. Instead, it degenerates to hell. As young people realize the world they grew up in was always a lie, and they get out of the Matrix, unlike the film's character, we just can't kill the machines and feel like everything's going to be fine. Dealing with these problems will require critical and realistic thinking. We now need the machine, which has been able to confer us godlike power and nearly infinite wealth. However, the machine cannot rule as it does now. The question of who will manage the machine and for what ends is the great question of our time. This feels like a strange point to tack on to the end of the video, but industrial civilization in its current form is doomed. It burns cultural institutions so quickly that the society cannot function. The birth rate is the easiest example of this, where in every industrialized society in the world, its population is destined to collapse over the next century. This crisis is horrifying, and it's unfair that our generation is expected to pay the bill for a party we never attended. However, it does provide a clean break in the 21st century to take a break so we don't lose our humanity. As of now, the machine is driving us to genetically engineering us to be cattle who can handle the dehumanization and silliness of our culture. Whether done with good or bad intentions, the creations of terrifying AI or climate change destroying our ecology. The collapse of modern industrial civilization and the birth rate are a gift from Mother Nature to keep us from driving the human race off a cliff into hell. Guys, no pressure, let's grab some popcorn and watch what might be one of the most interesting shows in history play out in front of our eyes.